Okay, let's start with what sounds like a sci-fi question but is actually deeply rooted in history. Can a musical composition from 1727 literally alter your brain chemistry today? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're dissecting a fascinating piece of research that reveals how one of history's absolute greatest composers used precise musical engineering to manipulate human emotion and neurochemistry.
We're talking, of course, about Johann Sebastian Bach and his legendary St.Matthew Passion. But, we aren't just going to be looking at the notes on the page here. We're really going to dive into the intricate psychology behind those notes and uncover how Bach designed an experience that transcends its original religious context to become this timeless emotional blueprint.
We're basing this whole exploration directly on Idoia Solores-Etxabe's brilliant interdisciplinary text. She completely frames this classical piece not just as some dusty religious artifact, but as a psychological masterpiece. She seamlessly blends history, musicology, philosophy, and even modern neuroscience.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover a timeless masterpiece, the theory of affects, the anatomy of an emotion, the Lutheran collective refuge, neuroscience in the Baroque, and finally, a mirror of humanity.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, a timeless masterpiece.
So, premiering way back in 1727, Bach didn't compose this for people to just sit back and be entertained. He used every single melodic line, every harmony, and every rhythm to actively pull you into the narrative. You aren't just passively watching the story unfold, you are participating in it. The opening chorus, for instance, doesn't just set a mournful tone. It actually acts as a prologue for the intense emotional drama that you, the listener, are about to step directly into.
Moving on to Section 2, the theory of affects.
To really understand how he pulls us in like that, we have to look at his rulebook. It was called the Baroque theory of effects. Think of this as early psychological engineering. It was the belief that music can evoke highly specific emotions, but only if you use the correct designated compositional tools. And Bach? Well, he took this theory to its absolute maximum expression. Every single scene, aria, and chorale was mathematically and artistically designed to provoke a very specific emotional response from the audience. He fundamentally understood that to persuade the mind, he first had to captivate the heart.
Which brings us to Section 3, anatomy of an emotion.
Let's actually break down how this works in practice by looking at the elements of the incredibly famous aria, Arbar Medech, which translates to, have mercy. This scene depicts Peter's massive repentance after denying Jesus. Now, Bach literally uses a solo violin to imitate the sound of weeping. He sets the entire melody in a really somber minor mode. And underneath that, he designs the bass line, the basso continuo, to evoke the physical groans of pain. He meticulously layers these resources, so you don't just intellectually understand Peter's regret, you physically feel that deep human vulnerability.
But, Bach's emotional manipulation wasn't just about intimate sorrow. It's heavily about dynamic extremes. Contrast that quiet, weeping violin with this intense, literal, rhetorical question sung by two choirs reacting to the cruel arrest of Jesus. Have lightning and thunder vanished in the clouds?
And Bach answers that rhetorical question with something called a violento fugato, a violent, frenetic fugue. The two choirs are just rapidly singing back and forth at each other. The rhythm is chaotic, it's high energy, it's specifically engineered to express this collective indignation and actually create a literal emotional contagion of panic in the audience. I mean, you literally cannot help but feel your own heart race when you hear it.
Let's get into Section 4, the Lutheran collective refuge.
Why did Bach utilize these extreme contrasts? Well, it leads us to a pretty fascinating historical context. Back in an era marked by the really heavy pressures of absolutism, people desperately needed a collective emotional refuge. Bach brilliantly juxtaposes opposing musical forces to represent that exact struggle. On one hand, you have the multitudes, these crowd choruses representing human flaws, chaos, and societal pressure. But then on the other hand, you have the intimate arias, which represent the individual search for spiritual peace and connection. It basically created a safe space for the congregation to recognize their own personal struggles within a larger collective identity and ultimately find some comfort.
Interestingly, the author points out a really strong parallel here between the Christian morality embedded in the work and Stoic ethics. While they are obviously separated by their metaphysics and beliefs about the divine, they actually share deeply practical survival tools, things like patience, acceptance of your circumstances, and resignation to hardship. Bach's music acts as this incredibly powerful vehicle to transmit those practical tools right into the listener's mind.
All right, Section 5, neuroscience in the Baroque.
So why exactly does Bach's music work on us physically? Well, the answer lies in modern neuroscience. Enter oxytocin. This is the primary neurotransmitter linked to human bonding, cooperation, and empathy. And science shows it's generated naturally in our brains when we listen to pleasurable music. So when Bach uses tranquil consonant, slow melodies in chorales like O Hauptvoll Blüten Wunden, he's doing way more than just writing pretty music. He's successfully triggering the release of oxytocin in his audience's brains. He's physically fostering collective empathy, love, and comfort. He was literally biohacking his audience 300 years before we even had a word for it.
Finally, Section 6, a mirror of humanity.
If we trace this piece through history, we can see exactly how it survived and adapted. Back in 1727, it was a strict liturgical tool for teaching parishioners in Leipzig. Fast forward to the 19th century, it faced heavy philosophical critiques from thinkers like Nietzsche, and it was often performed in these massive, grand symphonic versions that kind of stripped away its original moral intent. But today, in the 21st century, we've really seen a recovery of its deeply spiritual yet entirely non-denominational power. It's performed in huge secular auditoriums, bringing real comfort to listeners of absolutely all beliefs.
Ultimately, as our source puts it, the Gospel of Matthew, in Bach's hands, ceases to be a fossilized text and becomes a mirror of the human condition. Bach didn't just impose some strict morality, he completely humanized it. He translated universal human experiences, guilt, pain, compassion, hope, directly into sound. Which really brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If a 300-year-old piece of music was engineered so perfectly that it can still predictably manipulate your oxytocin levels today, what else in our modern sound-saturated world is secretly rewiring your brain right now?